This Sensato threat intelligence briefing is related to the OrangeWorm attacks. The security level for this briefing is green, meaning that you can freely share this information with anyone you see fit. The date and relevancy of this information is as of 1300 hours Eastern Standard Time, 25 April 2018. Before we get started, I'd like to spend just a couple moments talking about Sensato and what we do. Please note that the rest of the information in this briefing is specific to OrangeWorm. We only provide this information here to give you a kind of a qualification of who we are and what we do. Sensato provides advisory services related to penetration testing. We provide vulnerability assessments. We do a lot around incident response planning. We have a rather unique program in that area. We have a cyber range, and we also have programs specifically related to medical device security. We also offer a security operations center known as the CTOC, the Cybersecurity Tactical Operations Center. And we have our Sensato Nightingale product, which is a combination of honeypot and breach detection system. Sensato also operates an ISAO, which focuses on critical infrastructure information, specifically in the area of medical device security. We're partnered with a variety of different organizations in order to effectively meet our mission of standing between good and evil. With that, we'd like to get into the actual threat intelligence briefing. First and foremost, though, we need to provide you with a disclaimer. We ask that you pause the video and read the information here. But in brief, what this says is that the information here is provided on a best effort as is basis. We imply no warranties. And it is important that before you make any decision in your organization or apply the information provided here to any decision you may make related to your systems, teams, personnel, organization, or facilities, that you qualify the information and vet it. Again, the information is provided as is, and there is no warranty or guarantee that the information is accurate when you read it, or that we have not made a mistake in the analysis of the intelligence that we provide. In terms of the threat evaluation cycle that we embrace when we evaluate threat information, it's a multi-phase evaluation cycle. We think it's important for you to understand how we do this in order for you to understand the quality and the relevancy of this information to you and your organization. The first thing is that we usually receive information related to activity such as an attack, nefarious activity on part of an organization or such, and we begin a threat analysis. If that analysis warrants further investigation, we look into intelligence gathering to broaden and confirm what we've originally analyzed. We then start to process that intelligence and try to sift out things that we feel are either noise or not relevant to the actual specific area of investigation or hypothesis that we've formed. And then we go into an analysis and production phase where we continue to analyze the processed intelligence and continue to refine our hypothesis and remove noise or irrelevant information from our ongoing thesis. We then validate that information, and if needs be, we return to an earlier area of the briefing in order to kind of adjust what we know. The point is that we try to put a lot of time and effort into separating information from intelligence, converting information into intelligence, and most importantly, removing information that may be based on solely opinion, emotion, or not an objective kind of viewpoint. Once this validation is done, we disseminate the information through either a threat intelligence briefing document, what we call a flash report, or a live briefing that we're doing here today. We also try to do a projection on the intelligence, which means that we try to project where this intelligence could be leading us and what types of summations can be brought about and what types of options may be appropriate based on the intelligence. These projections, and we'll talk a little bit about those today, we call them forecasts, are probably the area that needs the most work by you to make sure that what we are telling you is validated. It's based on what we know and other previous intelligence that we've received or other types of attacks that we've seen evolve, and we try to make a best guess effort at determining what it is that we're forecasting. Then lastly, we review our efforts and update not only the information that we have, but also our process and procedures to get better with time. So this is the threat evaluation cycle. There are others out there. This is the one we use. We certainly welcome feedback on refining and optimizing this cycle, but we want to give you an insight into the steps we go through in order to come up with the information and intelligence that we provide you. So I want to give you a little bit of a snapshot regarding this current attack known as OrangeWorm. We see this right now as a reconnaissance operation that is targeting medical devices. Now, I think it's important to understand that there are two pieces to this when you think of OrangeWorm. There's OrangeWorm, the organization that is actually carrying out the attacks, and then there's the actual attack itself, which is using a Trojan by the name of K-Wampers. Now, it is important to understand that right now, as we mentioned, this is just a reconnaissance operation, meaning that we're not seeing that any data or information is being exfiltrated from systems. The targeted attack, this is a very targeted attack against a variety of industries, but the healthcare industry appears at this point in time to be the most highly targeted industry. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. The attack is extremely surgical in nature, meaning that it is not a fast-moving attack or a random attack such as WannaCry or attacks similar to that. The entities that have been targeted appear to be pre-selected. Now, this may mean that they were selected based on earlier reconnaissance or early intelligence gathering efforts by the attackers themselves, which led them to believe that these are the types of organizations they want to go after and may be part of a mission objective. In any case, these are extremely targeted attacks. Unfortunately, we don't know why people are being targeted. We'll talk about that a little bit more and how that translates to your decision making as you start to formulate countermeasures and strategies. The attacks do appear to have started in Australia, but a majority of the attacks, as we stated, are here in the United States. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that. There is no information, as I mentioned, suggesting that this attack is exfiltrating data or causing sustained damage to systems. Now, this means that this may be part of a much broader attack plan, which is still unknown. We don't really know the motivation that this attack and the execution of this attack is trying to achieve. This is really important to understand because unlike other attacks we've seen in the past at this rate, in most cases we see that the attackers do have an immediate objective they're trying to accomplish. Now, that objective may take place over time, such as an attacker who may exfiltrate data over months or a year or more. But in this case, we're simply seeing that they're collecting information and not doing anything else. The attack does rely on a newer version of K-Wampers and may include some polymorphic capabilities. It does focus on Windows computers, and we will talk more about both of those things as we start to analyze the actual attack itself and the technicalities behind the attack. In terms of threat vectors, we see that there's basically two. We mentioned one of them, the hospitals, and these are targeted entities. As we mentioned, we still do not have any discrimination, and meaning we don't know why the entities that are being targeted have been selected. There is at this point no public information that says that this size of hospital versus this size is being targeted, or hospitals in this geography, or a line of service or a line of business. If that information comes to light, we will certainly update our threat intelligence, but at this point in time, we have nothing that really tells us that there's a specific objective in terms of size, shape, line of service, affiliation to potentially government organizations or other factors that could say these are the types of hospitals. Given that information, our cautionary note to those of you that are providing information security to hospitals is that you need to be very aware of the fact that if you're a hospital, you may or may not be targeted, but you should err on the side of caution, obviously. The second area here is the supply chain. One of the things that has been noted is that this attack or set of attacks is targeting those who supply hospitals. This is an interesting vector in terms of the fact that the attackers are smart enough to analyze who is it that's involved in the supply chain. And this, we've heard recently that this attack may be being carried out by smaller attackers, but the level of sophistication in the attack itself and the mission planning, the analysis of who they're going after, the fact they've analyzed the supply chain and they've targeted the supply chain, the understanding of how that supply chain works, does show a certain level of maturity and sophistication related to this attack. The supply chain that we're seeing is a variety of different organizations, from independent software vendors to contractors to medical device and other device providers to partners of healthcare organizations. So obviously this does lead us to recommend that you be very careful and thoughtful and strategic regarding your supply chain and the implications it could have on introducing vulnerabilities or other payloads into your environment that are then being leveraged for this attack. Semantic Labs, I want to mention them for a moment, has done the leading edge of work on this and has done a great job of quantifying the information, or a lot of the information that's been coming to light regarding this attack. Their estimates show that about 39% of the industries that have been targeted by this attack are healthcare. Interestingly, as we just mentioned on the last slide, a lot of the other industries that are being attacked have some shape or form of support to the healthcare industry. So again, we see that supply chain being attacked and then becoming a pivot point to introduce a challenge to the healthcare organization. For those of you that represent pharmaceuticals, medical device manufacturers, ISVs, or consultancies, or other organizations that partner with healthcare, it is critical that you examine your own systems to understand if you are becoming a carrier or you are that pivot point that is creating the challenges for the hospitals. In terms of the distribution of the attack across the world, we see typically that the United States is the highest level of attack. We at this point do not know if there's any forensic evidence demonstrating why the certain countries are being targeted or not. That information may come to light and help with attribution, but at this point we don't have anything that tells us that there's a reason that the United States is the lion's share of the attack. Again, that may change as this information comes to light and more is learned about this attack and the purpose of the attackers and who's behind it. Again, this information is from Symantec. We do truly appreciate the fact they've put this information out there and have aided in really spearheading this research. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the actual technical components of this attack. The first thing to understand is that after the attacker gains access to the target's network, they deploy this Quampirs Trojan, which we'll talk a little bit more. Typically, this infiltration is targeting a medical device, meaning that the attackers are going after the medical device, exploiting vulnerabilities within that device, and then using that to launch other attacks across the hospital's network. Now, it's really important here to understand that, at least for now, in these early stages of this attack, we see that most of the devices being targeted are imaging systems, such as MRIs, CT scanners, and the infrastructure that supports them, which is often an end-of-life operating system running Windows XP or something similar. So there's an opportunity here that the attackers may just be going after these devices because they're low-hanging fruit and they make easy targets, as we all may know. Secondly, the fact that they're running end-of-life operating systems allows them to utilize older vulnerabilities that have not been patched and take advantage of those. So in terms of the attack itself, we're not seeing a lot of sophistication except for one thing, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is the polymorphic capability that appears to have been evolved into this Trojan. Now, Quampirs was first seen in 2016. There hasn't been much activity in terms of evolving that Trojan over time, but recently we've seen that there have been some updates to the Trojan in 2018, and we believe that has been done by the attack group OrangeWorm, who is now using this Trojan to facilitate their missions. Now, Quampirs in and of itself provides the remote access that allows the attackers to establish command and control centers, command and control communication, and then deploy other files and or commands to the Trojan that's running on your environment. The attackers are not covert. There's nothing that we're seeing or have heard of where they're trying to hide their tracks or activities. It's important to note that this is kind of a bold move by this attack group. Typically, these attackers will attempt to evade detection and or leave evidence behind. In this case, we're not seeing that. So that's an interesting twist. We see a lot of sophistication, it appears, in the planning and the execution of the attack, but in the actual technical components of the attack, we're not seeing a tremendous mark of highly sophisticated covert attack methodologies. Again, that doesn't mean that it doesn't really help us define who is doing the attack, and it doesn't rule out who's doing the attack. It just is what it is, and it's part of one of the components of the intelligence we have. The attack does use SMB shares to propagate through a network and perform reconnaissance. We've seen these types of attacks when we involve network traversal before, and unfortunately they continue to be a piece of low-hanging fruit for most attackers. So diving in a little bit deeper into how this works, we see that the initial attack is using some form of an exploit contained in a medical device. Now, please understand that just because these attackers are going against a medical device does not mean that they may not be using other vulnerabilities within your organization to gain access and perform the reconnaissance that they're looking to achieve. We often see corporate websites for hospitals or supply chain members, medical device manufacturers, pharmaceuticals, that are under the control of the marketing organization and not IT. Many times these sites are using WordPress, and they may be hosted by a third party, but more often than not, the marketing department is using a laptop or other device that's provided by the hospital and runs on the hospital network to connect to these remote WordPress marketing sites. We have seen and we have used and executed attacks where we attack the marketing organization's corporate website, they connect with a networked attached device to the hospital, and that becomes a pivot. And so we bring this up because we want to make sure that in all the noise that comes out when we're talking about this attack, that we don't lose sight of the fact that yes, we need to protect the medical devices, but there's nothing that is stopping the attackers from actually executing attacks on other vulnerabilities they may be finding. And given the level of reconnaissance that they're doing and the surgical targeting of different types of hospitals and organizations, they certainly have the wherewithal to think through what other areas they may be going after. It just may be that the medical devices and the signatures we've seen have kind of formulated the opinion that this is just a medical device attack. Once that vulnerability is exploited, there's an attack confirmation sequence that occurs. The QAM-Pors Trojan establishes a command and control session, allowing files to be downloaded and other information, and then reconnaissance to be conducted. And so that's the second phase, is basically of confirming the attack. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there's an execution phase. The attackers gather a variety of data on your network, which we'll talk about, and they send that information back to the attackers themselves. Lastly, on the post-attack side of this, there's no effort to remove or hide. We're not seeing that this thing is cleaning up after itself, but it's actually staying in place, which again, we need to think about, well, what is the motivation of the attacker and their ultimate mission and goal? If they're right now performing reconnaissance, as an attacker, I can tell you that if that was my goal and my approach in this case, then I would be planning subsequent activity at some point in time, and leaving behind the Trojan and the command and control sessions would afford me the capability to carry out subsequent attacks. So typically we would hide what we're doing. In this case, there is no effort to hide, so that is interesting. So let's talk a little bit deeper. Step one, we deploy, which means we've gained access through some vulnerability, in this case typically a medical device. And so we then deploy the QAM-Pors. QAM-Pors in step two activates itself by decrypting and loading a DLL from its payload. Once that DLL is loaded, the unique aspect of this QAM-Pors release, or this version of it, is that a random string is generated, right? And that random string is then injected back into the DLL or executable, which is a great way to evade a hash-based detection system. So if you have signature systems that are based on hashes, pattern recognition systems, antivirus, IPS, IDS, that are looking at hash-based signatures for detecting malware or viruses or Trojans, this would help avoid that, right? Because since it's a random string generated on the fly, you're changing the signature of that file, and therefore the hash detection system is not able to really figure out how to do that. To include that. So there's hopefully some other things we can use to detect them, but this is a great way to kind of create a polymorphic capability. Now, once that DLL is updated with the random string, we've avoided hash-based detection. The next step is to create a Windows service. In this case, that Windows service is WMI AP SRVEX. And the reason for that is we believe that once you create that Windows service, even if you inadvertently or on some type of schedule reboot that system that QAM-Pors is running on, it will automatically restart itself and continue to live in memory and carry out its operations. Once it's kind of embedded itself and gone through its activation phase, the next thing is it does an evaluation. And this is kind of an interesting surgical approach beyond just targeting a specific hospital, is that the attackers are actually looking for specific information to understand if there's targets of interest here. And if they are, they then begin using SMB and hidden shares to go ahead and look for the different targets that they may be after. And in some cases, if they feel that this is not a high value target, they don't go any further and they end the attack there. So there is some intelligence built into this, and for those of you that have been around for a while, it's got some remnants of Stuxnet's approach, not the Stuxnet code base, but the approach of looking for very specific things. I don't think at this point we know what they're looking for, but hopefully that'll come to light in the coming weeks. And then lastly, the information is gathered and cataloged the environment, and that information is sent back to the attackers. Some things to keep in mind is the hidden shares that I mentioned. These are them. You should take note of these and make sure that in your organization that you are either tightly controlling these or that you have disabled them. Unfortunately, there is a lot of software that uses these hidden shares for valid reasons, so I do understand the frustration for administrators to have to lock these down. But if you're not going to lock them down, at least put monitoring on them and part of an active review process that is checking to see who is actually communicating over these shares. And there's a bunch of other countermeasures and protocols that you should put in place. I can't get into them, lack of time here. If you'd like to know more about those, please feel free to reach out. The second thing is the service signature. You should be looking at machines that are running this service name. Or have that binary path name and command line. And if you do find that, that is probably a good indicator that you may have been compromised by this or similar attacks, and it warrants further investigation. It is not confirmation that the attack has taken place, but certainly a reason to heighten your investigative process and possibly step up the response of trying to understand why this is running on this machine. So that is something to think through. You can easily do that through some PowerShell scripting, but it's something to keep in mind. Once the Quampirs virus is implemented and running, and it's decided that this is kind of what it's going to do, it's going to figure out how to that it should take the next steps and start cataloging data. There's a remote command that it starts to execute. It kind of goes through these 10 or 15 commands and starts looking for data. Now, interesting, it's simply just using tools and information that possibly already exist on the platform, and it's basically just building up a catalog of your network interfaces, your operating system, your configured host name, your version information, and a whole bunch of other things. So, it's a very, very powerful kind of asset inventory that's being built up. And there's some very serious implications of that. One is that, this is going back to an attack group. Now, in and of itself, there is value, and I think this is an important thing for all of us to keep in mind, is we often think about the fact that the only valuable data that the organization has is either financial or personal information or personal health information. Financial information, health information is typically what we think attackers go after. But I want to kind of take a step back and have you think about the implications of an attacker who has a complete fingerprint of all the devices on your network, including operating system levels, network interface cards, services that are running on that machine, and taking that information, dumping it, making it publicly available, or selling it. Because it would make a great black market artifact with extreme value. That if I could go to the market and say, hey, for X amount of hospitals, I have everything about them. And so any vulnerability that comes up in the future, I could just go to this database and go, oh, these 3 hospitals have that, and I know how to go after that now. So it is a very kind of scary situation in terms of understanding that the hospital, that these attackers have developed kind of an asset inventory of hospitals. And I think that, for me, is probably the most disconcerting thing, because as an attacker myself, there are a lot of things I could do, from creating a database that automatically triggers an alert whenever a new vulnerability comes up using ICS cert information, all the way through to selling the information to other parties that want to launch attacks, as well as other nefarious things. But I want to point this out because this is what's happening, and I think there's a lot of debate on, well, what's the value? They're not going after data. What's the big deal? And I think the big deal is that you suddenly have your entire asset inventory placed into the hands of who knows who and what they're going to do with it. On the other side, I suppose, I've said this before, is that if you ever really want to know what's on your network, ask attackers. It seems that whenever we work with organizations, they can't tell us what's on the networks, but we as attackers have no problem getting an inventory for you at any time. And this is probably a great example of that. The next piece is, let's talk a little bit about mitigation and defense, and think about some of the things we can do. And I don't think any of this is going to be rocket science, but I think it's always good to hear. And if you have other ideas, please share them. We'd like to get that out to the community and make sure that all of us who are on this side of the fence can kind of stand shoulder to shoulder and put things in place to make things better for all of us. First and foremost, validate your SMB shares. Make sure you've put the right patches in place. We've had many attacks occur, very fast-moving attacks that utilize SMB, so look for those hidden shares. If you can't lock them down, put in place monitoring around them, inspect them, check the analytics around them, and make sure that you're monitoring those. Determine if you have Windows XP devices. This attack is leveraging Windows XP. And look, one thing that I hear a lot is, well, we don't have any XP. And I can tell you from experience that when we come in and do risk assessments of hospitals, many of you have XP and you just don't know. Again, you don't have a full asset inventory, so how do you really know? Many of the places we find XP devices are the HIM area, imaging, lab, pathology. Sometimes if you have a research group in the hospital, we'll find them there. And a lot of times they're not in the data center, they're not in the data closet, they're just under somebody's desk. We've had countless situations. We walk into a lab and we'll find 2 or 3 servers. We'll ask the people in the lab, what is that? And they'll say, oh, it's this, that, and the other thing. It does medical necessity checking. Oh, can we take a look at it? And yeah, it's XP. And we're like, well, who takes care of it? And well, it's somebody's kid who happens to work in the lab, comes in, and the IT department doesn't even know it exists. And please, we see this not just in small, tiny rural hospitals, but in massive university settings. And so you need to really understand what you have. It's a great place to great time to go check out and put a survey out to your user base. You need to harden stuff. If you do have medical devices, I know it is extremely hard to figure out what ports they're running, but try to figure out if they're doing any communication on these ports. If they are, you need to figure out why or shut them down. Obviously, if they have ports that are not documented, it could be cause for concern, but we suspect the attackers either have some form of a 0-day or just are finding that, you know what, medical devices are easy to get to, these ports are open, they're not patched, and let's just go for it. It's not a very sophisticated attack. If you have communication occurring from your network to the command and control servers that this attack is using, please, that you need to block that, obviously. But if you don't know what the CNC servers are, we have developed an Excel spreadsheet that we're happy to give to you. Just let us know at info@sensato.co. We'll send out that spreadsheet to you. But you want to block access, regardless if you find traffic or not, to those servers. One thing that's interesting is these attackers have not updated their command and control list. Now, we could say that's just because they don't care. It could just be that part of their methodology. It could be a smoke screen. It could be something deeper in the code we just haven't understood at this point. So net, if you need a list of the command and control centers that this attack is going after, please let us know and we will go ahead and get that to you. Look for service signature on Windows systems. As I mentioned, you could probably craft some PowerShell scripts to go out, crawl your systems, and see if that service that we mentioned earlier is running. The big one here is evaluate your partners. And it's really important because the supply chain is being attacked and used as a vector to get to these systems. Now, this is hard. We understand resource limitations here, and that it's very hard to get out to all your partners and business associates and technology providers and figure out, like, are you aware of this attack? What have you done to mitigate it? And unfortunately, there is a HIPAA requirement to do that. This is a significant event, and you are required under HIPAA to go and investigate the impact of a significant event on those who have BA agreements with you. We are not trying to do a commercial here, but if you need help in doing that, our recommendation would be that you reach out to Comply Assistant and speak to them regarding their service. They have a software as a service, cloud-based service that allows you to just send them a spreadsheet of all your partners. They then can go out, reach out to those partners if they already don't know them, and give you risk scoring, communicate with them to understand if they understand this threat. Comply Assistant is part of our ISAL, so they're able to get this threat intelligence information out to your partners and then work with those partners to essentially figure out where they stand and then get you back the reports that say, hey, look, out of your 700 partners, these 30 are the ones that you really need to go talk to. So we feel it's a great service. We don't make any money on it. I'm just telling you it's there. Go speak to them, and hopefully it works out for you. If not, you need to do it on your own. You got to review your file shares, obviously implement least privileged access, but you also need to check your BAs as we talked about. One thing, notify your clinical engineering and help desk about hardware anomalies. It's important. They are your first line of defense. If they are seeing some type of anomalies, especially in medical devices, it needs to be raised quickly, and you need to kind of look into what is going on and why. So very important to kind of make sure you give the clinical engineering team and help desk team a heads up on this threat and what is happening with this and why they need to be a little bit more diligent as they see this. And then obviously increase security awareness training for all users regarding this possible challenge and to report and provide information if they see something. We've mentioned this already. The attack is run against medical devices, but does not mean it is only against medical devices. Obviously, it could be against anything. The motivation for the attackers is to collect information, which could obviously be part of a much broader mission. We've mentioned that before. So you need to have extreme vigilance across your organization because, again, we don't know what they're doing, and if it's occurring to you, then they've got a great fingerprint on you. The reality is a phase attack of this nature could be extremely devastating. I gave you some examples of that earlier with what could happen to the information and how that can be used to propagate further attacks in a very surgical manner, which would fit into the kind of approach here. If you find this or any other indicators of compromises related to this, obviously execute your IT response plans, but you should notify FBI and DHS. If this attack does happen to you, if you could please also notify us. We're not going to try to sell you anything. We obviously would love to work with you, but more importantly, we want to get the information out to others. We feel that there is a responsibility in the community of healthcare information security to kind of share information. We can do that rather quickly through kind of the operations we have now and the medical device task force that we formed and our relationship with some of the other federal agencies. Monitor news and threat intelligence sources for the coming weeks. We need to be very vigilant if there is a indicator of evolution for this attack or a potential next phase of this attack. And so, we should be considering what's next, why do this? If it's just some big effort to grab assessment data, asset data, that's crazy, but I guess maybe that's all it is. But we feel that there's possibility of some other attack. Speaking about that, let's just talk a little bit about the threat forecast. One of the things I think to take away from this is not so much with this attack, but specifically, and we've already talked about, well, what could happen next, but is really that this attack kind of makes it very clear that medical devices are now fair game. And so it is really important to understand that the intelligence, right? So as an attacker myself, the fact that somebody else has proven, hey, you can get into these devices, I'm going to watch for that, right? And if I can leverage that in my own work, then it's going to breed new attacks. So I think the biggest thing to take away from this attack is that medical devices are no longer off limits. We've kind of seen really not a lot of coordinated attacks against them. This is a very coordinated attack against medical devices. So I believe the second piece here is that it's got a proven return on investment. If you spend your time breaking in, you can get a lot of information. And, it's a challenge. Little plug, we do have a program called MDCOP. It's a program that is specifically designed to help protect, monitor, and put in place the policies, procedures, and protocols related to protecting medical devices. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on it. People are very excited about it. We've made it very affordable. Very easy to deploy. We can have it deployed within weeks, and in some cases days. So just something there. If you're not going to do something with us, then please, you probably need to make a real concerted effort in 2018 to improve and evolve your cybersecurity strategy. We do believe this concept of polymorphism within malware will continue to grow. We've talked about this in other threat intelligence briefings. We've discussed it in our hacking healthcare programs and in our other forums that we do education on. And so this is really something that you need to think about in terms of your antivirus and your IDS and IPS is if it will detect a polymorphic attack. And they're very hard to detect, so it's not the chances of finding something that can do that, unless it's looking even at anomaly-based detection, it's very difficult. So keep an eye out on what vendors are able to deal with this, and then really hold them to the fire as to how they're going to do that, because it's a very difficult thing to kind of deal with. And then consider honeypots. I don't know why we don't use them more across industries, especially in critical infrastructure. We've designed our own called Sensato Nightingale. We love it, obviously. We think it's an amazing product. We'd love to tell you more about it. Extremely easy to deploy. Provides not only immediate alerting. It's not pattern based or anything like that. It's an immediate alert of someone in your network. It has a automated forensic collection capability, and it also has automated countermeasure capabilities, which are really cool, right? So love to talk to you more about that. And if you don't use ours, use somebody's. So the message here, obviously we'd love to work with you, but it's, hey, go do the right things. We think these are some of the right things. So with that, if you need to get a hold of me directly, my information is here on this slide. You could certainly follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or visit our website, or feel free to call us. We try to do as much as we can to give back to the industry and the community. The example is these threat intelligence briefings. But if there's something we can help with on your end, or if you just want to talk, or you just, whatever it is, we're happy to listen. We do believe we're all in this together. If you want a list of the command and control servers that are mentioned in this threat intelligence briefing, again, please reach out. If you'd like a copy of these slides, please reach out, and please feel free to share this with others who you feel may benefit from it. Thank you.